Okay, all right. What you see is what you get. Mhm.
There's no volume,
Mm,
Shruti.
no sound, yeah?
No sound.
You'll have to share with sound. When you're sharing the screen, you'll have to share with sound. You can stop the film now and then play again.
Yeah.
Hi, we can begin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to webinar 3 of our webinar series.
Okay. Continue. There was an echo coming. So
Oh, okay.
there's a bad echo, like.
Okay, then give me just 1 second.
Sorry for the technical glitch, but something not in our control. Yeah, carry
Uh,
on. Yeah.
can you hear me all now? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to webinar 3 of our webinar series on the various aspects of whole school excellence. We have previously addressed leadership and learning environment as core components of achieving school excellence. Today, we shall focus on another component, assessments for school excellence, towards fine-tuning pedagogy. Continuous and consistent assessment serves as a crucial bridge between teaching, learning, and overall school excellence. While governments and funders typically focus on school assessment data, a program's true impact can only be fully understood through assessment and feedback cycles involving multiple stakeholders. Therefore, evaluating performance at every level, students, teachers, and leadership is essential for identifying both successes and areas for improvement. This webinar will explore the role of multi stakeholder assessments in driving whole school excellence. Before we begin, we have a few requests. Requesting all participants to always stay on mute. Please do keep your videos on. Kindly share your questions in the chat box during the webinar, mentioning who your question is addressed to. We will address a few questions during the last 15 minutes of the webinar, so please do stay with us till the end. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel of speakers who bring a wealth of experience and insight to today's session. Our first speaker is Ms. Gayatri Vaidya. Gayatri Vaidya, with over 2 decades of experience, is the Associate Vice President and leads all large scale assessment projects at EI-Shiksha. She develops innovative approaches to learning by applying assessment and pedagogical principles to promote systemic changes and drive education reforms in India. Today, she will address the question of effective student assessment. Our second speaker is Dr. Sophia Gaikwad. Dr. Sophia has 15 years of experience in education and is the head of the Symbiosis Teaching Learning Resource Center since 2014. She has successfully conducted over 580 faculty development programs, working with national and international experts, and all across Maharashtra as well. Today, she will focus on the question of teacher assessments. Our third speaker is Ms. Dimfena Diaz. Ms. Dimfena Diaz, with over 20 years of experience, is the co CEO of Muktangan Education Trust. She oversees the entire program with a focus on assessment of leadership as a component of whole school excellence. I now invite Ms. Vinita Sanghi to kindly take this discussion forward.
Yeah, hi. I think we can just jump into it. Thank you for that introduction, Jalem. And I think we are all now just waiting to hear from our speakers. So I think we will start with the question of student assessment, which is how do we design effective student assessments? What is an effective student assessment? And I think there's no one better than Gayatri Vaidya to address this for us. So over to you, Gayatri. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you, Muktangan team, for having me. I think it's also a pleasure to be a part of this ongoing discourse and talk. I will start by sharing my screen. Just give me a confirmation if you can see my screen. Is my screen visible? Uh, is the screen visible?
Yes, we
Okay.
can see your
Yes,
screen.
yes.
Yeah. So, like it's all the context has already been set. I think today I want to focus on effective assessments, and my area of talk will be around student assessments. If you see, I have just tweaked the title a bit. Wanted to highlight what my talk is going to be all about, because assessments by default, when we think of it. I've been a teacher in my previous avatar, and as teachers, we want to put everything in an assessment, but oftentimes choosing what to test as part of the assessments becomes very important. It's important what we test or measure as part of the assessment tool, and that's how it can lead us to understanding the actual learning levels. So the focus of my presentation is going to be on assessments with a central idea of the quality of assessments, but I would also touch upon how an assessment can inform systems, and when I say systems, governance and government systems, and also interventions in terms of modifying the classroom strategies. At any point, if you think my speed is maybe too fast, too slow, please help me with a comment in the comment box, and I'll be happy to sort of regulate the flow. Today's agenda in the next 15 to 20 minutes will try and cover three aspects. I think this group as such understands assessments, but let's just also re-establish why we assess children and how they are in a way different from high stakes examinations. Also then understanding what is a good assessment, and how would a good assessment tool look like, or how would it be different from the regular tool, and how the systemic changes can be made possible through a good assessment. So these are the three focus areas for today's presentation. I will start with a famous video that at EI we love a lot. So I hope again you can see my screen. Okay, not this one. Here. Just also confirm if you can hear the sound.
So you counted that. Yeah, yeah. And not because this point is 8. No.
Okay.
This 4 will count as 1 and 6. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We not see how much there is. Start from 6 because it starts from 4, 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This to this. Yeah. This to this. That is 0 centimeter. This is 0 centimeter.
Okay, I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll skip the rest of it. But basically, if you see, there is a question that's there on the slide, on the right side of the slide, and the video was about interactions with children. So typically, whenever we have certain questions where the answers are different from what we had expected, we try and go and interact with children and understand why they chose a certain answer. Now, if we look at the question, it's a very simple question. The only slight, you can call it a twist, is where we have positioned the pencil not at the starting point of the scale, not at 0, but at 1. And in fact, this whole positioning really decides whether a student understand measurement as a concept or not. If we typically start it from 0, the expected answer is always where the object ends on the ruler. And for child to pick that number becomes easier. But for us to understand whether the student or children learn measurement as a concept, just moving it by 1 centimeter, and you saw in the video how they had different reasons and they were arriving at different answers. Typically, mainly, and again, the video is available. I'll share the link also in the chat box. Mainly, if you focus, the confusion arises between counting of numbers and actually knowing that measurement is the distance between 2 points. And unless we give such questions to children in assessments, we would always assume that they know measurements without actually checking it in the right way. So today's talk and my couple of next slides, I just want to focus on the power of questions and how questions can actually help us understand whether what we are measuring or what we are assessing is the important aspect to assess. There is a whole concept of rote learning or mechanical learning, which is slightly different from memorization, but something that is so sort of ingrained in our system that we can immediately arrive at an answer without even understanding the question. If I can still stay on this slide, if I move the pencil back to 0, any student who can really count and identify numbers will be able to give me the correct answer as answer 5. What I get to know from that question is that the child can read and the child knows counting, but it does not give me an overall understanding of the child's ability to measure an object on the ruler. It's only when I move the pencil from, or only when I put them in a slightly unfamiliar situation, which is where the actual learning levels can be tracked and a dialogue between the student and the teacher becomes possible for the uh, teacher to know where all the learning gaps have been left out. So I think the biggest I mean, in the recent times, we talk of technology, of course, important. We talk of various analytical techniques, very important. But unless you have the right type of questions in your assessment, and unless your assessment tool is balanced to cater to all different types of children, we may not end up finding the right learning levels. So the focus of my presentation today is on quality of assessments. And when I say quality of assessments, I want us to have a very narrow focus on how a good question can actually influence the assessment. Some more questions on the slide, and let's spend a couple of minutes on this, right? So that we understand how two different questions can really play out differently in terms of us understanding students' learning level and not memory. So if you look at the very first question, and on the left hand side, the very first question on the corner is a typical question. I think if you as a science student, if you ask me, just asking me, waking up in the morning, the first thing I would answer, hey, 1/6 is the difference between the gravitational pull between earth and moon, because it's so ingrained, the fact is so memorized now that I don't really have to recall it. But when I say 1/6, do I really understand the relationship between the gravitational pull on earth and gravitational pull on moon, and how that will act out differently? That's not clear. So if I ask the question, like the first mechanical question, where I'm asking for certain factual details, I may get to know what they remember, but not necessarily whether they've understood the concept or not. The same question, if you look at the second question next to it, which is a modified version, again checking on child's understanding of gravity as a concept. Here is where I think all of us will have to read it twice to even arrive at an answer, right? It's the same question. It says what, like, a particular object and how does it play out on moon, where because all of us know that the gravitational pull is 1/6, rather than asking that fact, can I leverage on the knowledge of that fact to know whether the child knows concept or not? So considering that 1/6 is the gravitational pull as an established fact, if I give this particular question and these choices, will the child be able to arrive at the right answer? And if yes, then I know that the concept of gravity as a concept is understood. If not, then maybe it's just a recall of memory that is helping them give the correct answers. Second question, again, a math question at the bottom of the left side. Typically, what we ask when we ask for perimeter is we give a certain defined object, we give certain measurements, and we say, hey, can you measure the perimeter out for me on this? And what we end up actually checking is child ability to do additions, because you've given all four numbers. It's simply basically the child does 4 plus 2 plus 4 plus 2 is equal to 6 plus 2, 12. And we assume that they know perimeter as a concept, but what we are actually checking for is addition and not perimeter. But when you ask the question which is next to it, where you don't really give them measurements, understand that child knows that if there are sides to a particular thing, whatever the measure of those sides are, the cumulative of it is the perimeter of that object. But if I give them something like this, I actually then test whether the child understands where perimeter as a concept is applicable. The first misconception it challenges, or first conceptual gap that it can help you identify, is if the child associates perimeter with only defined objects, right? So between 1 and 2, typically you will find children who would say only shape 1 can have perimeter, which is not true. Second conceptual gap it can help you identify is if the child chooses shape 3. Now, if you carefully observe, shape 3 does not have a continuity in terms of its structure. These are 4 different lines that are put together, and by that definition, it's not a closed structure, cannot have perimeter. So while it looks like a defined structure, it's not a closed structure and it will not have perimeter. So when the child is sort of assessed on questions like this, you don't only get to know whether the child knows the correct answer or not, you can also, as a teacher or as classroom practitioner, you can also understand when the child does not know the answer, what is the prevalent misconception? And then the way you reteach the topic is not the same way you taught them the first time. Now, second time when you approach the topic in your classroom instruction, your approach is now going to stay focused on either how amorphous shapes, closed shapes can also have perimeter, or how any discontinuous newer surface will not have perimeter. So the whole discourse inside the classroom changes. The last question on the right of the slide is again a typical social studies question. For my school years, I did not like social studies because I felt I had to memorize a lot of stuff. But in fact, after joining with EI and now working on social sciences question, I really find social sciences an interesting subject, right? So typically the questions that we have are like define peninsula. And it's very easy for me to rote learn or memorize a definition and just put it out. But imagine if I remove the word peninsula completely and then ask children to identify based on the characteristics of peninsula. Will they be able to do that? So the second question exactly does that. It does not use the term at all, but it says the shaded parts that you see on the map, can you identify the common characteristics of these? So if the child understands what peninsula is, the child will be able to answer. If not, the definition is not going to help them. So testing one, first identifying which concepts are important to test. Second, how to test that concept so that you don't end up getting superficial or surface level knowledge, but you get a deeper understanding of whether child has mastered the concept or not is very important. Yeah, this is more of a summary slide. We're using examples of monarch and viceroy as two butterflies who by and large look very similar. The only difference is if you are a butterfly expert, you can actually focus on their behavior and some fine lines between them, and you can identify that these are two different species. Assessments are that differentiator of knowledge, right? My questions, if they are very similar to what the child encounters through textbooks in rote practices, I may end up finding that, oh, they know the concept, but actually the conceptual gap can be higher. Similarly, when we think of assessments at a systemic level, at the governance body level, typically because we consider that our assessments are good, we keep focusing on infrastructural structural necessity and other things, which are of course important, but they are ancillary to good education. And only a powerful assessment will help us know whether there is a learning gap or not. And that learning gap, irrespective of the infrastructural strength or not, requires to be dealt with differently. So I think the purpose of assessment is not to really let us know what my students know or what my state students know or what my intervention students know. It's basically to know whether they have mastered that concept in such a way that they can use it in their learning journey, which is life, right? The applicability of conceptual mastery is something the assessment should help us know. I'm assuming that the pace at which I'm delivering the presentation is fine. Uh, if not, you can just unmute yourself and share. Otherwise, I'll continue to keep this pace. Um, so basically, I think this slide has two reports that EI has produced around a decade back, which are large scale studies done at India level, both of the studies. India Today uh, covered it, and that's why you see that cover page. But basically, this was the study carried out in 4 metros of India. And the study had the most, you can say, elite or high fee of private schools also. And it was found that the misconceptions, some of the misconceptions that we were discussing as part of measurements and other things, were even prevalent in those schools. So one, there is this whole understanding that um, education is school dependent, was in a way challenged through this, right? Unless you are teaching it in the right way, assessing it in the right way, and then providing remedial instructions in the right way, irrespective of the type of the school, irrespective of your socio-economical background or your overall exposure, these misconceptions can really prevail across socio-economic strata. And that is something that the report established. We also have Asar study, Pratham Asar study, and we also have internationally PISA, which year on year has been reporting the learning gaps. And if you go back and look at PISA questions, you will realize that many of these questions are also extremely application driven. These questions require child to internalize the concept and integrate multiple concepts to answer this. So I think the power of question again plays out in how our assessment will actually sort of impact or show the results, right? It's easy for me to show higher results by using weaker questions, but that will never help me understand what's the actual learning level. One more question example, I think very favorite topic of math teachers, decimals, right? And typically, I'm not going to get into a lot of explanation of this question, but option C is the right answer. But you see that um, around 43% children have chosen option D as the correct answer. This is the percent performance. So while only 36% students have rightly identified the right correct answer, 43% students have identified 2.5 as smaller in comparison to 2.15. This is the equation, right? Why? Because typically they are reading the number after decimal independently and not as the part of a whole, right? So this should be ideally a fifth part of 10 or 50th part of 100, and this is 15th part of 100, and hence this is smaller than this. But because that connection does not arise and they are just looking at 5 and 15 as individual complete numbers, around 43% children have picked up this as the correct answer. And some of these children are the children who are on an average perform well. So this is the graph where you say children who could answer 0 answers correct and children who could answer all 40 answers correct, and that is plotted against the percentage of each option performance. You can see that for option D, which is the wrong option, uh, children who are at around 20% or 18 questions correct, which is around 50% performance, also have this misconception. So considering that all bright children will know these concepts is also a myth that we need to keep in mind. So at EI, with each question, we have the percent performance. There is a statistical coefficient called point by serial coefficient, which gives the comparison of every child's performance against the brightest child in the class. And then we also have something called this, which is our item response curve, where each response is recorded and an item response curve is generated. Um, if you consistently do good assessments, be it your classroom, be it an intervention, be it a state or a smaller country like Dubai or a group of countries like UAE, if you consistently follow standard assessment practices, you can really bring a huge shift. So we've been working with Dubai in specific, but basically Emirates, where the mandate for them is to come in first 20 positions in PISA by 2030. And for around 10 plus years, they've been taking EI's asset, which is a private school assessments in English. And they have been more than them taking, I mean, taking assessment is of course one part. Taking assessment which are designed scientifically is an important part, but also how we utilize assessments to bring changes in the learning level is another part. So assessment will typically give you a certain report. It will show you which concepts overall, what's the class distribution, but then how you take each of these levels to the next level through teachers' capacity building or classroom intervention strategy discussions is something that is exclusively, I mean, so assessments, we call it more like a diagnostic report, right? It just shows whether my hemoglobin is right or I mean, enough or low, optimum or low. That's where assessment's role stops. But how to bring that hemoglobin level to the optimum level is a different discussion. Unless I have the right way to measure hemoglobin, I will never know what is the need. But to an assessment in itself will not cure for the learning gap. So let's also know that assessment is just a diagnosis, and then there's a lot of intervention or classroom strategizing that a good teacher can do to overcome the gaps identified by the assessment. For At EI, we generally do, and my division looks at all large scale assessments. So we do assessments with a minimum like 5,000 children to, in Andhra Pradesh, we are working with 40 lakh children every quarter, and we are doing assessments for all of them. But the assessment have certain basic principles that we keep in mind. There has to be a certain frequency of assessments, like health checkup. You can't just do assessment once and forget about it. If you really want to see power of assessments, they have to be periodic. Now you can choose frequency. Minimum a good assessment annually done is a good hygiene of learning levels, but these have to be periodic. They have to be low stakes. There shouldn't be any punitive or reward punitive actions or reward associated with these assessments, because our purpose is not to sort of identify whether children are at a certain level or not. We are trying to understand what are the learning gap and how can we strategize around it. Because we do large scale, we also often propose sample study, because otherwise economically it doesn't remain viable. These assessments are designed on a very solid blueprint, and the blueprint has different skills identified, and each skill carries certain weightage. And unless that, and I will see that as the next point in a couple of slides, unless you have a very scientifically identified blueprint, again, you may have great questions, but they will not help you sort of distribute children on that spectrum. And you will never have a good distribution frequency to differentiate your children who are struggling with certain concepts versus children who have mastered certain concepts. So skill-wise balanced paper is important. And like the type of questions we discussed, these assessments are done to understand and not to sort of judge. And that's why the questions are also more understanding and application driven questions. Um, I hope the pace is okay. If there are any questions, you can use the chat also, and I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll keep moving forward. Um, Not going to read this slide, but basically, I think with NEP coming in 2020, NEP talks of assessments, like it talks for around 100 plus times you see the word assessment mentioned there. So now there is national focus on assessments. We work with different state governments, and we already see how um, states are becoming pro assessments. And when I say pro assessments, assessments were happening earlier also, but now the focus is on actually deeper scientific effective assessments, and that's something that is being played out. Internationally, there are agencies like PISA and TIMS. They have been doing assessments for years together. They also publish some of their question items on their websites, and I would recommend the audience to just go to these websites and check some of those assessment items, because PSITE is at the next level. Their science questions will also be driven through essays and graphs, and it's more like analysis. But that is done well. If you really use good questions and conduct efficient assessment, you will end up finding data which is not just performance, but it will give you insights into where all the gaps are and what we can do better. And that, in a way, overall shifts the needle towards higher learning outcomes, which is what a good assessment should ideally help us achieve. Um, let's move to the next one. I'm going to be slightly quicker. I'll just see how much time
Yeah,
do
I
I.
think we just have to quicken the pace a bit,
Yeah,
Gayatri, if possible. Yeah, thank you.
perfect. Yeah, the first part was the biggest. Yeah.
Yeah.
ठीक है. ठीक है. So I'll just focus on assessments, how the assessment data, you can see that the stool kind of a structure on the left of it. Basically, as any good learning practice depends on three. There is one large scale assessment data that comes from student assessment. You have questions that give you that data, and both of them dovetail into pedagogical practices. There is existing research, but you can also do better research using this. And this is more of a cyclical practice, good assessment, robust data translating into pedagogical interventions, churning out research, also again coming back to the next assessment. We call it a concept of science of learning. And we believe that if you really do learning through assessment, it is as good as prescribing a pill. You can actually know which particular misconception to address in a student's learning journey. As of now, it is not very scientific. We have to depend on teachers' knowledge of that student. There are certain principles of assessments. I think some of it I've spoken about, but basically focusing on things that are extremely important to test, not testing for memory, asking questions which are familiar but in a non-conventional way where the context is different for child to feel challenged. Even when they don't know the questions, they should be able to answer those questions. And not everything requires to be present in an assessment. My textbook can be 200 pages, but my assessment is only going to be 30 or 40 questions. So just being mindful of what I definitely need to test so that I can identify my child's learning level is the key here. Um, the assessment blueprint part I have spoken about, but some of the measures through which we can continue to focus on learning: a robustly designed assessment blueprint, having sample papers or sample questions which can help children get exposed to certain powerful questions so that they start thinking in a certain way and are not limited to textbook practices, how we collect data, how we analyze data, and most important thing, once you have data, data is nothing but a game of numbers. It only makes sense when you take it back to teachers and teachers identify how to use those numbers. So the sixth point, which is dissemination of assessment results and designing classroom strategies, become very important. I think we've spoken about this in Dubai case, but basically one assessment can inform you at multiple levels. It can give you skill-wise analysis, which is something that I mean, it can give you subject-wise analysis where I can have subject-wise performance of multiple students together just to know where my students in terms of my intervention or my state stand. I can also have district-wise or intervention-wise or center-wise comparison to understand where each one of them is and where more support is needed. I can have skill-wise, question-wise data where I can say while overall performance is say 60%, but my XYZ skills are strong or ABC skills are very weak. And as teacher, I need to strategize around those. So assessment data is not just 70% pass, 30% fail. It actually gives you very definite insights into what, where exactly can be changed. And a good scientifically designed assessment with powerful blueprint like this, where each skill has 3 to 4 questions minimum, will give you a very robust finding in terms of how students are learning. On the basis of wrong questions, I think we've discussed misconception already. The performance of children, because you get option-wise performance here, you just don't get to know whether they've done it right. You also know where they are struggling, and those misconceptions can become a tool in the hand of teachers. So currently we have around 200 misconception posters that we have designed for Diksha platform, and we have sort of put them out for public there using EI questions. And each of these are questions which are tested on maybe 1 lakh, 5 lakh, depending on the numbers, high number of students, to understand that these are prevalent misconceptions. And each of these poster also has certain learning strategies that the teacher can deploy inside the classroom. Yeah, with that, I think this is the concluding slide. I'm not going to read it, but unless we know what we want to measure and unless we know how we want to measure it to really understand mastery versus gap, assessments, while we talk about it, will be useful only to a limited extent. A powerful assessment can really change the way children learn and how we can help children learn. So with that, I'll end it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gayatri, for that. I mean, it's really been an insight into very, very interesting questions. I'm sure everyone has a bunch of questions that they would like to ask you on how to frame these kind of assessments, which we will deal with at the end of the webinar. I'd just like to summarize, Gayatri's talk. And so she started by saying that it is important to see what we actually want to assess, and not just what to test as part of the assessment. We want to test competencies and skills and not only the textbook. The heart of the assessment, she said, is quality of the questions. And that really came about beautifully, in the video also and everywhere, how to put them in a slightly unfamiliar situation And then you actually get the understanding of the concept, rather than, living in a dream world and saying, yes, they've understood it all, when you ask in the same way. The purpose of assessments, you said, to know, what students know, what they don't know, so that you can influence the remedy, and also to know what is it that they can actually apply in life, and not just on a knowledge basis. You spoke a lot about analysis of the assessment data, which is like not only pass, fail, or how many got above 80% or below 50%. It's a lot about the analysis, as in, subject wise, skill wise, exactly what is the child able to do, not able to do. So all this kind of data becomes very important, and important to analyze, so you know where the gaps are, and you know where to fill it in. If you just know so many got over 80%, what are you going to do with that? So, like you said, a good quality assessment informs the system about learning level gaps to bring about a systemic change. So I think that pretty much deals with what you spoke about. Can we now go over to Dr. Sophia, who will talk about teacher assessment? Thank you so much, Gayatri, for that.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Sophia?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Gayatri, for that wonderful insights. And I think I'll be able to, pick up from the examples that you've already shared, so that when I start talking, because I think that is very much the main purpose of today's seminar, where we are talking about assessments. And when we are talking about assessments, one thing is for sure, that it is not only dependent on one aspect, that is only the learners, because teachers are the ones who are going to create the assessments so that they are able to assess the learners. So when we are talking about assessment for teachers, I mean, that is what I would be trying to cover in the next few minutes. So first of all, the question that comes to my mind is, why at all do we need to assess, right? And when we are saying, if we were to ask this question to anybody, why do you assess a certain thing? So, for example, if I were to, I assess because maybe I want to check whether the equipment or an appliance or an object is working as expected. Can you please go on shares in the slideshow? I have given animations, or maybe I can, yeah. So maybe we would want to find out why an object, whether it is working as expected. Can I share it from my end, so that I can operate the animations in a better way? Is that all right?
Yeah, I
So if
think
you
that would
can-
be better, because then you can keep up the pace with what you want.
Yes, yes,
instead
yes.
of, you'll have to keep.
Great, great. Yeah, yeah. I'll just do that. Yes,
Sure,
yes.
not a problem. Thank you.
Are my slides visible now?
Yes. Yes, visible.
Great. Yeah. So the question that comes to my mind, or rather, that why do we assess? So maybe if I want to check whether an appliance or object is working as expected. For example, we use an iron at home. So if I say that yes,
Sorry, your voice
this iron is working properly, that clothes that are wrinkled. Okay, am I audible now?
Yes, now you are. Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Is it better?
Much, much better. Thank you.
Okay. So when I say that, okay, it is working properly, that means it is finishing the task, or, completing the task that it is supposed to do, right? So maybe I assess just to check whether a particular appliance, particular object is meeting its expectation, whether a certain benchmark is achieved or not. So maybe we have a ISO mark, or ISO certification on different products. And when we see that mark, we understand that, okay, this meets certain quality standards. And that is why, so when we also go in a marketplace to buy certain things, we always check for these certifications, we always check for these quality marks. So to me, we assess, so that we understand that there is a certain amount of quality that has been achieved or not. And in other words, simply put, assessments are a most, desired way of quality improvement, because in doing so, we understand whether we have reached a particular point or not, and where should we be going in order to achieve the mark, right? So this is about inanimate things, that is objects or appliances that can be bought in the market. But then what about teachers? When we see teachers around us, teachers teaching in different scenarios, teachers teaching in different kind of schools, teachers who are teaching different kinds of students, teachers who are teaching different kinds of subjects, yeah, under various disciplines, the kind of knowledge, the kind of skill that they require to disseminate the knowledge, to deliver the content in maybe some extreme conditions. There are still places in India where there is only one teacher schools, where there are students who are traveling far off places. They have to travel, maybe a few kilometers, 10-15 kilometers, to reach the school. So all these different kinds of schools that we have, and there is this person who is responsible to disseminate knowledge. There is this person who is responsible to deliver the content to the students sitting in front of them. So then how do I assess whether this teacher is doing his or her, or whether the teacher is doing their job correctly or not, or whether they are meeting the expectations or not? So when we started discussing about the seminar, these questions were coming in my mind. And because I've been in that field, of course, there are certain things, there are laid down principles, there are laid down methods that are adopted. And yes, when we are assessing teachers, the first thing that comes to our mind is teaching. So what does a teacher do? So a teacher is teaching. Now, if I have to assess how the teacher is teaching, I have many ways to do it. Maybe I can see how the session plan is created. We all know what a session plan is. So whether the outline, the session plan outlines the objectives correctly, whether the learning outcomes are mentioned correctly, whether an appropriate teaching learning activity is designed for that particular session, whether the tools and techniques that the teacher is, trying to use in that session are, appropriate or aligned with the text. Whether the teacher is trying to use technology, whether the teacher is trying to bring in some fun element in the classroom. So, I mean, the list can go on and on. Finally, whether the teacher is, creating the right kind of questions in order to, assess the learners. So if I were to assess whether a teacher is teaching, I may have these different kinds of assessment tools or ways of assessing. But then my next question is, do teachers really teach? Or are teachers supposed to teach? Versus, are teachers supposed to, create an atmosphere of learning? Now, if I have to understand, or if I have to really be sure that the students in my class are actually learning, then what am I supposed to do? How am I going to assess that? So learning is a process that, that where we can understand or where we see that the learner is learning. So then how I can be sure that the learner is learning? And if this is one criteria, that, the students in this teacher's class are learning, then how do I assess whether the learners are learning? And based on that, how do I say whether, yes, that teacher is really doing their job in the most appropriate or the best way that is possible? I think this is a tricky situation that we all are dealing with, because teachers today know their jobs. Teachers today enter the teaching field based on, pre-service training. They gain a lot of, knowledge before they enter the teaching learning spaces. They are well aware of learning theories, And in the recent decade, the kind of, revamping the curriculums have gone, especially in teacher education, really are very fascinating. So now teachers who are entering the field of education are well read, they are well aware, they get good amount of pre-service training. Now, when they enter the teaching learning space or the system for that matter, or a particular school, and then they start teaching. And then as, peers or management, you have to assess the teachers. How do I really assess them? Is the question that sometimes or most of the times takes the center stage. So I'm just going to dwell on this point for the next few minutes. So when I'm talking about learning, how do I understand whether the learners are learning, right? And because that is going to make a statement about the way teacher is teaching. So when I say, if I were to define what is learning, it can be defined in various ways, but simply put, learning is a process of change, knowledge and skills, and it also, exhibits a persisting change in human behavior. So for example, if there is a class, a teacher is teaching the students and the students show these changes, right? There is a process of change. There is a change in the behavior of that students. And mind you, behavior change in humans is a far-fetched goal because human beings are wired in such a way that we easily pick up our habits, our thoughts, our actions, and then to change them is really difficult. So if as a teacher is going to instigate or a teacher is going to facilitate these changes, what is going to happen? So if I have to understand what is exactly happening, and if I have to understand what learning is, I think it involves these three processes. First is think, second is reflect, and third is change. So when we are talking about learning, and if I were to depict a graph of learning, I think these are the three main things that can be observed in the learners. Whether the learner has developed an ability to think, whether the learner has developed an ability to reflect on their own thoughts, and based on those reflections, whether the learners are able to adapt, whether the learners are able to change, whether the learners are able to relearn certain things. I think if a teacher is able to plot this graph for their classroom, I think there is no need of assessment, because the change in the learners, the change in the learning journeys of the learners itself is talking about the work that the teacher is doing in the classroom. So then if we were to really capture this change, what we have to do is we'll have to come up with tools that can help us measure this change, right? Because if we look at the literature that is available right now, yes, we have many strategies available at the present for assessing teachers, right? So when we are talking about teachers, there is the Kirkpatrick's model, which talks about 4 levels. First is the reaction. So I go in the classroom, I conduct a session. So what is the immediate reaction of the learners? They are excited, they are happy, they are very satisfied. So the immediate reaction, learning, they learn something out of it. They're able to articulate, maybe, revise or present the summary of what has been learned. But the next 2 levels, that is behavior and results. So what change has occurred in their behavior and what that learning is resulting into? So for example, I learn a new technique or a new method of solving an algebraic problem. Am I able to apply it in my next exam? So that confidence that the learner gets, okay? So this is one way of evaluating. And of course, there are other strategies also, where we are talking about summative and formative strategies. Formative is like on the go, as supervisors, as management, we try and talk and have conversations with teachers so that we understand how their journeys are progressing vis-a-vis a comprehensive comprehensive kind of evaluation that is done at the end of the academic year. So if we were to talk about formative assessments, there are so many techniques. We have classroom observations, we have the student feedback, we have the peer reviews, self-reflection, and also the professional development. That means the in-service training that the teachers undergo so that they are able to, keep themselves upgraded. And also the summative examples, which is like a comprehensive kind of check. So at the end of the year, and this is what I've been trying to emphasize all this while, that the students' performance data, that the way the students are performing in the class, the way the students are able to take up new challenges, the way the students are able to design new things, the way the students are able to see beyond the content that is offered in the classrooms, the way the students are able to articulate their thoughts, the way the students are able to help each other to work in a collaborative and encouraging environment. So it's not only bookish knowledge, it's not only knowledge, it's not only, gaining a proficiency in a particular subject, but it is also learning together, having empathy for your peers, for the classroom, for the people in your surrounding. I think that is the real goal of education, that we just don't need people who are proficient in a particular discipline or a subject. We need people who will care for their fellow citizens around them, because at the end of the day, we are going to live in a society. We are not going to live in isolated, working laboratories. So this message also is very, very important. And I think if we look at assessment with this point of view, what is the context? I think the initial discussion, initial examples where we said that there could be a small school somewhere, on the top of a mountain where the students are traveling 15 kilometers. There is one teacher teaching some 15, 20 students who are coming from not so privileged background, versus an international school which is following an international baccalaureate curriculum, who has a excellent infrastructure, who have already set clear cut targets or what is expected of them, who have laid down job profiles, and accordingly they get support from the management. The teachers teaching there in such schools also come from privileged backgrounds. So what is the context? So unless and until we have this context defined, assessing teachers will be unfair. It will not be done in the right sense. What is the circle of influence? So again, I go back to the same example. This teacher who is teaching 10, 15 students somewhere in a remote area, that teacher is affecting all those 15 families, because that child coming from that family is going back and talking so many things, and that person may be a first generation learner. That child would be kind of a person who is going to change the entire family in that particular area. So what is the circle of influence of that teacher? Is it limited only to the classroom? Is it limited only to a lab activity? Is it limited only to 2 classes? Is it limited to an entire semester? What is the circle of influence? I think that also makes a very, very important decision when we are assessing the teachers. And of course, the other responsibilities along with teaching, what are the other administrative roles that the teachers are doing? How well are they interacting with peers? Are they responsible? Are they kind of liaising between parents and the school administration? Their interaction with authorities, because of the expertise they have, are they associated with nodal agencies and state and national bodies such as NCT or SCRT for that matter, National Council of Teacher Education? So how are they taking their expertise out in the society and contributing in the society? I think all these aspects should be considered when we are thinking of assessing teachers. And so I believe that it cannot be just a one-time activity or, just one aspect or one perspective. It is layered, because the role of teacher is layered. They are affecting, they are touching many lives, they are doing many things. Um, thinking of a scenario-based assessment also could, really help depending on the context or depending on the kind of school that we are into. And that is why a one-size-fits-all approach may not work. And if we really have to change the perspective, the perspective that I've been trying to, say that what are the learners doing? So the learner's performance, which is facilitated by the teacher. I think if that is how we are going to look at a teacher, I think we'll need tools and techniques accordingly. And I think, yes, quality is important, because if we see an industry who is producing certain goods, yes, quality and benchmarking and quality checks are important. So is the quality of teachers important, and that is why assessing them is also important. But I think in this entire process, if we can remember that we are dealing with human beings who have the capacity to think, who have the capacity to love, who have the capacity to imbibe and facilitate and nurture change, I think we will definitely be able to find out good mechanisms of keeping the teachers motivated through, helping them see what impact they are making. So I think let us call it as measuring impact instead of calling it assessment. And I think on that note, I would like to stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sophia. Really well said about the teachers. And I love the last slide. Let's not forget, we are talking about human beings here. And, it's sometimes very easy to get, judgy about things. But, so I'd just like to summarize what you said. I really liked the first question when you said, are teachers supposed to teach, or are they supposed to create an atmosphere for learning? I think, if we just get that right, I think the whole process of teaching and learning, will be more together. Also, you spoke about learning being a process of change. So the learner is somewhere getting to somewhere else. There's some change, which could be in knowledge, skill, attitude, behavior, like you spoke about. But that learning is a process of change. And if the teacher sees that change happening in the classroom, that's the biggest assessment, right? That's what you reiterated, that I can do how many ever assessments, but if I am seeing this process of change in my children, in knowledge, skills, attitude, behavior, and the process of think, reflect, and change, if I'm able to see that through in my children, then that is the best assessment I can have. Children being able to demonstrate the application of knowledge and skills, like you spoke about, maybe creating new things, or using the skills they have learned in life, real life contexts, and all of it. So that would be there. And of course, what you ended with was how teachers, easy to say teacher assessment, but more important to say measuring impact, and that it must be based on their context. There are teachers, we cannot equate all teachers, because everyone is coming from a different background, different privileges, different equipment, different situations. So they need to be assessed based on their context and not one size fits all. And really, the last what you said was, let's not forget, they're all humans, uh, with a good heart at the end of the day, right? So I think, where Gayatri took us, to student assessment, the next was, once the student is assessed, then what? That's where you came in, because then what about the teachers? Are they seeing those gaps? Are they able to fill in those gaps? Like you also mentioned that, teachers sometimes have other administrative duties or other jobs to do, and we need to contextualize that. I think that's where leadership, or leadership comes in, whether you talk about governance, leadership, whatever you talk about. So I think that this discussion on assessments will be incomplete without assessing leadership as well. If we are talking students, teachers, this is all reflecting from the leadership that the teachers and the students are being impacted. So I think, over to Dimfina Dias now, uh, CEO of Muktangan, to talk about assessment of leadership and what role that plays in achieving school excellence. So over to you, Dimfra.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanita. I think you kind of took away my opening lines, but
Sorry.
exactly, no, that's okay. I mean, what you said just kind of resonates with my thoughts, as in, it's not enough to just look at student assessment and teacher assessment alone, but leadership assessment is as important, if not more important. And in Muktangan, yes, I can't help but talk about what we do here in Muktangan. In Muktangan, we have our own approach, which is, in a way, developed on a very needs-based in a manner. And if you look at our leadership assessment, a lot of self-reflection. I'll be actually sharing the tool with you at the end and taking you through the process of how we do it, but a lot of self-reflection and the person himself or herself coming up with certain strategies for remediation and mechanisms for the same. Shruti, I'll just be doing that for you to get on to the next slide. Thank you for your support. So I think we'll get on to the next slide. Well, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. All of my colleagues here at Muktangan know that. He's a leadership guru for me. And I can't help but use his approach, which is the golden circle, when he talks about the what, the how, and the why. So I'm going to talk about what is leadership. That's nothing new for any of you. And when we're assessing leadership, what exactly are we assessing? We are going to be evaluating an individual's leadership skills as well as abilities and the behavior or the attitude. And if you combine all of these three, that's what goes into the assessment, and that's what makes an effective leader. Because you cannot have, or you cannot be strong in one alone without having the complementary attitudes or behaviors in a good leader. Now, why is leadership assessment important? Yes, it's not enough to look into what is happening in school students and assessing them and seeing whether performance is at par and matching the objectives that are the goals that you set out to establish in the beginning. And similarly, establishing the kind of a proper assessment for teachers is not enough. But assessing leadership is as important. And when we assess leadership, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Because when you assess leadership, you're basically identifying strengths and weaknesses, not of the leader or leaders alone, but it's also a reflection of the organization. It could be a school, it could be an NGO. We being an NGO, we look at, leadership, and there are various leaders. I'm not just talking about the topmost leader. But there's a second line, there's a third line, there are various leaders. So assessment of all those leaders is very, very important. You identify strengths, you identify weaknesses, and once that is done, you have to identify certain needs or gaps where development is needed. And to address those, what professional development can be, provided can be provided for the leader. What training? It could be internal, it could be external, and it could be short term, it could be long term. And another reason for assessing leadership is also to evaluate leadership potential. Because no leader is permanent. Nobody is going to be permanent in that position. You have to develop the next line. You have to look at how you're developing, and not necessarily the next line. It's also the team. As a leader, it's not enough for me to have self-development and ensure that I have the right qualities or I have the right approach or the right behaviors. What about the team that I'm working with? Because there's a line below them. They also have the necessary qualities and attributes? And with all of this together, that is what will ensure alignment with student and teacher assessment. And that's the only way how student learning and teacher growth can finally lead to school improvement. Now, there are various ways of assessing leaders. I personally love the 360-degree feedback approach. I mean, it's very important for a leader to be reflective at all times. You reflect literally on a daily basis. So you're reflecting from your self perspective. You get reflections from your peers. You just have to keep your eyes and your ears and your mind open to it. It's so important for a leader to be open to that kind of feedback. Then sometimes you get a direct report. Somebody may come and tell you, or you may get a report from a senior. You get from your trustees, from your founders. They're giving you direct feedback. So that kind of feedback, reflecting on it, working on it, using it as a base on which you can further grow, further improve, is so very important. Another kind of leadership assessment is when you do these so-called psychometric assessments. I know when I was being groomed to take on this leadership position in the organization, I also had to undergo these kind of assessments. I had an external coach being appointed by the organization, and I had to undergo a whole lot of these tests and a lot of discussion, a lot of reflection that I had to kind of do, with a lot of support from the coach, of course. And that really enabled me to evaluate myself, to assess myself, and help me to become a more reflective person. And then, of course, you have competency-based assessments, which is feedback from self or peers, and so on. Yeah, next. Am I going too fast? I'm just mindful of the time, Shruti and Vinita. Okay, yeah. Now, I talked about why assessment of leadership is important, and it has so very many benefits. First of all, you will see the effectiveness of the leader being improved, and that will, without a doubt, reflect on the teachers, on the students, and even on the parents in a school. If the teachers are performing well, the students are performing well, the parents are happy, and you will get the support of the parent community. There's increased self-awareness of the leader, and the leader is then able to kind of, ensure that the right strategies, the right goals, the right approach is being adopted. When those are identified, like I had said earlier, development and training needs can be very, very clearly identified and addressed and worked on. And that, of course, leads to enhanced team performance. And probably it's because of the stage that I am in my journey in the organization. There is also succession planning that one needs to look at and one needs to take cognizance of and address and do something about. Okay, so I think what Shruti is going to be sharing on the screen now is the assessment tool that we in Muktangan use for leaders. And as you notice, we call it a development appraisal tool. Why? Because we don't like to use the word appraisal in its purest form or how it's really typically understood. It's a developmental appraisal and it's a two-way process. I'll just quickly take you through it. If you see here, we've got critical attributes. I'm not going to list them. But if you look on the right-hand side column, we do this assessment 3 times in the year. Even you talked about periodic assessment, Gayatri. So a one-time assessment or once in a blue moon assessment is not enough. But these regular periodic assessments of even the leaders is so crucial. So we do a baseline, a midline, and an endline every year. And at the end of the year, the scores are then taken as the baseline for the next year. Now, again, if you look at baseline, we've got 2 columns there. So first of all, the leader being assessed will score himself or herself. And the entire, scoring line and the rubric for it is shared in advance with the leaders. After that, that document is then shared with the appraiser. The leader shares it with his or her senior, who's the appraiser. And if you look at these attributes on the left, Shruti, maybe we can take it a little higher. You've seen very, very clear attributes which are commitment, openness, enthusiasm, reflectivity, responsiveness, quest for learning, which is one of our key values. You have assertiveness and effectiveness of communication, both written and spoken. And on the middle column, you can also see very broad indicators of each of these attributes. So this is one category. We have the critical attributes. If you go to the next sheet, Shruti will share that. You also see there are key performance indicators. These are nothing but, like a lighthouse that kind of keeps the leader and her team on track. It shows you the way, it kind of guides you and directs you. So there you've got goal setting, professional development. We have put in Muktangan intellectual property because we found that, whatever intellectual property we had or we have, is it being documented properly? Is it being designed as per the Muktangan principles? So you see, this is a very unique tool, unique to Muktangan and needs-based. This is something that we do. This is something that we need. And I'll also talk about how this tool was designed. Obviously, it's not a ready-made tool that we used, but this tool was designed and arrived at in a very participatory manner. And that's also very unique to Muktangan. In Muktangan, leadership is participatory to a fair extent. I will not say entirely participatory. That won't work, but to a fair extent. So when this tool was being developed, we had several leaders and the next line talking about what is it that we need to be good leaders. We did a brainstorming, then all the suggestions that came up, they were categorized into critical attributes and key performance areas. And then we chose the most important ones. Of course, we could club some and arrive at these important ones that we shortlisted, and this is our tool. Now, coming back to the process, say, for example, if I'm doing the midline assessment, the appraisee, the one who's being appraised, will fill up his or her scores, send that document to me. Then I put in my scores. If I'm the appraiser, I'll put in my scores. But it doesn't end there. There is a face-to-face discussion, and I give the appraisee an opportunity to talk. I hear what he or she has to say, why he or she has scored himself at that particular level. And it's always validated with certain examples and behaviors and actions and maybe certain, performance of the appraisee. Then as an appraiser, if I agree with the scores, I will talk about that. And I'll say, yes, I do agree because of this, this, this. And if not, then I will share my score and say, no, but I feel this, or I'm scoring you lower, or I'm scoring you higher because of these examples. So that discussion, that openness in the discussion, both on the part of the appraiser as well as the appraisee, is extremely crucial. And I think that is something that is really held as in good stead. And we've seen how you get a very fabulous buy-in from the team at various levels. So in a nutshell, this is the appraisal tool that Muktangan uses. And we've got different tools for teachers. We've got different tools for department leaders. We even have another tool. For lack of time, I'm not going to be sharing that with you. Another tool for the absolutely senior program team, which is, but the process is the same that we follow. So that kind of sums up my take on leadership assessment, the what, the how, and the why, as Simon Sinek's golden circle approach. Thank you. I hope I've managed to finish on time. I'm very aware that we've got
Yes.
very limited time before we finish.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much, Dimfina, for that. I'll just summarize, what you spoke about Simon Sinek's golden circle, about the what,
I
how, and
couldn't help
why
myself. Yeah.
of leadership, of course. And very interesting to hear about the development appraisal tool and the name, calling it a development appraisal tool. because an appraisal somehow, sometimes it sounds a bit negative, that I'm going to appraise you on your performance and what you've done wrong, or whatever, that kind of thing. But to say development, it is for the leaders to develop together. And also what was interesting was making their people aware of what they are being appraised on. It's not like suddenly the person will come and you're telling them, this is what I have assessed you on already, without you knowing that. I think that's important for students, teachers, and everyone to know what you're going to be assessed on and what are the parameters. What do I need to do to be a good student, a good teacher, a good leader? So I think those parameters was good, and also that the tool was designed in a participatory manner, which I think is the biggest quality of a leader, is to take the team with them. Like you said, no leader can function on being a one-man show. And I think this is what we sometimes struggle with the government, because someone is a leader over there, and we get into projects and we get enthused about things, and then the person changes and everything changes along with that. So to make sure continuity is there, sustainability is there, is so much the role of a leader. So thank you for that, Gayatri and Sophia and Imfina. And I think we can move over to questions now. So if anyone has some questions, they can put it in the chat box, or you can also raise your hand and ask. So would anyone like to start? Any questions? Or Shruti, you can share the document and you can display the questions. Shruti? And we can start with some questions for them.
I think
Someone
we
has
have a
raised
question.
their hands. Someone has raised their hand.
Hi, this is Kushal
Yes,
here.
yes, please go
Yeah.
ahead.
Hi. Yeah, my question was regarding what are some of the prerequisites that you see for any organization to embark on this journey of leadership assessments? What should be in place so that they know, okay, now this is in place, so we can go to the next level. Um, there are organizations that I work with, um, where assessments definitely they want to do, but we are not sure like whether we should do assessments internally, at what point we should start, whether we have adequate resources as of now to even there, because there is a very important and very meaningful report that's going to come out of this assessment process as next steps for the organization, right? Um, do we have those capability inside to actually start working on those? So just wanted to understand about like what at what stage we should opt for such assessments.
Yeah, so I think this question is directed to Dimfina, because he's talking about at what stage are you ready for leadership
Yeah,
assessment, and how do you
yeah,
know any prerequisites for this, or yeah.
yeah. Thanks, Sunita, and thanks for that question, Kushal. I think what is most important is the openness and the willingness and awareness. A leader needs to be aware that assessment at all levels is equally important. You cannot just assess one part. You cannot just, it's like we say the total systems approach. It's like the body. If my head is aching, just addressing it or even only understanding that, it could be something related to the stomach, it could be something else. So it's everything together that matters. So that awareness, that acceptance, that willingness to be allowed to be assessed. If I may ask, are you an organization that exclusively does assessments?
No, we work with the leadership. I'm basically from Ahmedabad, and we work
Uh-huh.
with school leadership teams like middle
Uh-huh.
level coordinators, HODs, and sometimes school leadership, basically to
Okay.
understand how they can foster inclusion for children with disabilities inside the school, right?
Okay.
And we do see assessment at leadership level a very important factor, because over the last 8 years that I have worked with, one critical factor wherever we have been successful is where leadership is extremely aware, right? Which would,
Yes,
like, honest and honest
exactly.
reputation is 10%, right? Like
Yeah.
10% basis where we have been. Everywhere else, we are at a stage where we are still making the leadership aware. If this is an important part of the system, like only if we upskill teachers for inclusion, that's not going to happen. They need that space. They need those resources. They need those support on a daily basis to make that
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah,
So, and
yeah,
that's where like my question came from. Like, how do we understand whether like the how do we make that system ready for assessment, and what should be the
mm,
prerequisite in place?
yeah. Great question. So,
Yeah,
like I said, awareness
yeah,
and again the willingness to make that change, because it's
yeah,
up to the leader who can bring about those changes. But I need to be solution oriented. I need to, if I'm aware
mm,
and then do
mm,
nothing about it, it's not going to help. I should have that attitude where I am willing to make changes, bring about that change, because I know ultimately who is going to benefit: my
yeah,
teachers, my students, and the
mm,
parents, of course.
yeah.
But unless I see it that way, I'm not going to be able to, be open to making those changes.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, I do definitely see a value in this because this kind of assessments can bring that self-awareness about the system to the leader.
Yeah,
You know, that's a very, very big value add of this tool. Yeah. So thank you,
absolutely.
Dimna.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Kushal. And really, Dimphana, like you said, the whole thing is the willingness first. If I'm not willing to see a problem or see that, I need to develop in any way, and I'm not going to accept that, then, it's very difficult to go ahead. So I can understand your struggle also, Kushal. All the
Yeah.
best to you. Anyone else? Any question? Uh, Anyone else? Raise your hand or in the chat box. Okay, I think we can go over to the questions then, Shruti. Okay, so there are some questions displayed on the screen. There's some questions for Gayatri here. Gayatri, if you could take a look at the questions and you can pick which one of these you would like to address.
All of them are interesting to answer, but I think in the for the interest of the diversity of crowd, I think
Yeah.
one question where we've said, it's only the assessments are only available, the kind of assessments that I was talking about, the questions, they're
Hmm.
available only to a limited pool. Just wanted to say that agree. I mean, educational initiatives does work through projects and through like business proposals, but as part of a public goods service, there's also a website called aqad.in where we give out a question for every grade every day. I think those questions are then open in public domain and would encourage the group to utilize those. The
Could
website
you
is
put that in the chat
I'll
box,
do that. I'll
please,
do
so
that.
that everyone can
So,
access? Thank you so much
yeah,
for that. Yeah.
that sort of allows for, at least in terms of overall exposure of children on certain questions, I think that should help out. Depending on
Yeah.
the time, I can answer other questions as well, but I think
Yes.
we have
No, because the
covered.
whole thing is to set that kind of quality question and to know the difference, in the
Yes,
two. And if that is not accessible
correct.
uh, regularly, then it makes it very difficult
Correct.
to
All,
keep doing
yeah.
this.
Also,
Great.
there are around 10,000 questions that we've given on Diksha platform. Those are also available. So
Okay.
those 10,000 plus whatever comes on AQAD on a daily basis for each grade, we give one subject question combination. So those can be easily accessed and used freely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you. That definitely answers the question. Okay, can we go to the questions for Dr. Sophia? If you can take a look at them and you can choose what you would like to start with.
Yeah. So I think yes, all the questions are very interesting, but teacher's portfolio is something that is readily available. It is a tool that can be, made of with the help of technology or without technology. It's a collection of all things that a teacher does. But I think I would like to address question number one. How do you get teachers to focus on the circle of influence? So here, I would like to give a small example. So there was this student in senior KG, and it was the first parent teacher meeting, and the teacher was talking with parents, explained the the notices and everything, and after that the one of the mothers was waiting patiently to talk with the teacher, and then she came back and she said that you are known in our entire household, and our son talks about the way you tell things to do. And one so just a few days ago, and the teacher would instead of shouting or instead of punishing the children, what she would do is, if some kids are not really paying attention, what the teacher would do is she would ask them, the children, to stand up on the chair for 1 minute with their hands folded, so that they understand that they have to pay attention. And then they would, it's junior senior kg children, because they're always roaming around everywhere. So then she said that that child made his dad stand up on the dining table chair, because that father was not the father was not obeying the child. The child said that if you don't listen to me, you have to stand up. And the child made the father stand up on the dining table chair. This is a small example that what we do in the classroom. We may be in the classroom for 40 minutes, 50 minutes, 90 minutes. But what we do and what we say has such a large, ripple effect, I would say. Because, that father is going to share that story with someone else, maybe his colleagues in his office or someone. The mother is going to share this with her friends, her family members. You don't know till where this incident is going to pass on. Now, I'm not going to talk about what the teacher did in the classroom, whether making that child stand up on the chair was right or wrong. I'm trying to focus on till where it reaches. So just imagine the power the teacher has in the classroom.
Yeah. So you're saying the
We
circle
as
of
teachers
influence
are
is
not part
limited.
of policymakers. Yeah. So we as teachers are not part of policymakers. We are not, we don't create program structures. We don't create, policies, or we don't create curricula. But when it comes to actual implementation, the responsibility is on our shoulders, because when we enter that classroom, we are like the manager of that classroom. Each and every child in that classroom, along with their own, area of influence, their families, their relatives, their friends. We don't know how far and wide what you talk in the class or what you act in the class is going to reach. So if the teacher is aware of this, so just imagine if we can make two powerful statements, two positive statements in a day, how far we can reach. So I think if we as teachers are aware of this, and with that conviction, if we teach our subject. So if I teach physics with that passion, if I teach mathematics with that passion, if I teach Marathi with that passion, just imagine the amount of passion and love you will be able to transmit in the children for that subject. Because 10 years down the line, we need good physicists, we need good sports people, we need good scientists, we need good artists in the society, because they are going to make our society wholesome. For that, we need to develop that kind of passion and love for the subject. So this is what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that's really great to understand that the circle of influence is not just the people sitting in front of you, but it's a ripple effect. It's going into the families. And when you talk about that many people, your circle of influence is actually much wider than you think it is. And to know that you're having that impact makes you
Yes.
continuously alter your own behavior, knowing that it's
Yes.
going to affect in that sense. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Dimsana, would you please take a question?
Yeah, both questions are interesting, but I'll take the second one. You also see feedback from them about. Fortunately for us, and I think it's one of our strengths in Muktangan, we have a very open communication culture. You have people of all levels who feel comfortable enough to come and question, to come and tell you. They give you feedback. They'll tell you something that went well, something that didn't go well. They may even be offering their own suggestions. Yes. So I think we do have that. And I think it's all thanks to the openness and the culture that we've established here in our organization. So I don't want to take credit for it by myself being the person that I am, but it's also to do with the organization. And I'm not the only one. There are very many leaders in our organization who have the same manner, same style, same approach, being very open to feedback. And I think that's very, very important. Very, very important.
So thank you, Dimfna, for that. So, like you said, I think the biggest quality of a leader is being open. Like you
Yes,
said, open to receiving, to listening to different ideas, and you already spoke about peer evaluation and all of that.
yeah.
So I think that's been great. Uh, Any other questions? Or I think, Jailam, over to you for the conclusion.
Thank you so much to all speakers. It has been an extremely enlightening discussion, I think, and almost a very wholesome one as well, because we have looked at so many different levels of assessments. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Um, and for being such an enthusiastic part of our webinar today. Thank you to all participants as well, those of you who are here on Zoom, and also those of you who are watching from YouTube. Thank you for giving us your time and also your attention. um, we would just really request you to fill out the feedback form. The feedback form link is on the chat, but you can also just scan the QR code. Your feedback would be really good because we always organize our webinars on the feedback that we get from the last ones. So please do take a minute to scan the code or to click on the link and fill it out.
Yeah, and just also to let you know that besides the Zoom, we had people joining in on YouTube. So we had a total of more than 80 people listening in on this. So I think it's been a great webinar and very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Vinita, Jilam. Thank you, Gayatri and Sophia.
For having us. Thank you.
So a couple of announcements. The recording of this webinar and the last two webinars are on YouTube, and you can watch them at your discretion and whenever you have time. So before this, we have done the webinars on leadership, empowering communities, and the second
Indeed.
was on shaping learning environments where pedagogy meets school excellence. So all of the webinars on this webinar series will be on our YouTube channel that at Muktangan. Um, as well, please do follow us on social media. Please do follow us. You go to our website, check out. You will be able to see a lot of the research that we put out. A lot of you'll be able to hear case stories on the various aspects of our program. And if you follow us on social media, you will be getting a lot more updates on what we are doing. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to close out this webinar, and it has been a really good experience. Have a very good evening.